fucking doesn't. Fairly simple. So I'm opposed to regulation because it doesn't work. And it's not that it doesn't work because it's not done right. It's not because it doesn't work because we're not trying hard enough. It doesn't work because of the very nature of incentives in the human society. And the nature of incentives in the human society when it comes to centralized organizations, whether you're looking at centralized financial services organizations or the centralized regulatory infrastructures that are built upon them, is such that power corrupts. And so why do we have regulations in the first place? The reason we have regulations in the first place is because power corrupts. And this is not a new lesson. This is a lesson that my ancestors, the Greeks, have been telling us since 3,000 years ago, with great philosophical treatises on how power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there is no more absolute power than control over money. And control over money is the power that corrupts fastest and most deeply. So we know that power corrupts. And so why doesn't regulation work? Because it cannot solve that fundamental problem. Because those who need to be regulated the most are the ones who have acquired great power over the system. And those are the ones who absolutely cannot be regulated because their power affords them the possibility to be above the law, to be above regulation. The very organizations that need to be regulated the most, not little runaway penny stock Ponzi schemes. They don't need to be regulated. They're rank amateurs. We all know the truth. We all know the truth. The biggest criminals in our economy today are sipping coffee, sitting next to each other in Davos and congratulating each other on the great increases of the S&P 500. It's not the little penny stocks that need to be regulated, it's Goldman fucking Sachs, and we all know that, and they're never going to be regulated. They can't. And the reason they won't be regulated is because their great power affords them the ability to be above the regulators. Regulation is a solution to a centralization problem, the problem of control over people's money. And we know very simply that if you give someone control over other people's money, sooner or later, usually sooner, they steal the money. It's as simple as that. They steal the money. They run away with people's money. You let someone control your money, they will take your money. Your best friend sitting next to you, your business partner, you get $100 million in funding, wake up one morning, your best friend has moved to Aruba with $100 million of your funding. It happens every time. The story is the same. Sometimes it's greed. Sometimes it's covering up for a mistake. That's also a very common story. We bet a bit on the casino stock market. It wasn't going well, so we tried to hide it and double down on the bet, and that didn't go so well, so we quadrupled down on the bet, and that didn't go so well. We octupled down on the debt, and before you know it, you've got Nick Leeson all over again. Or Mark Karpellis. Same story. Same exact story. Covering up for a mistake by increasing the odds until it all collapses in a pile of ashes. So if you have that problem, the understanding that control over money leads to theft, the way we solve it is by creating another centralized institution, a hierarchy, an organizational system of committees and individuals to watch over the first centralized system of organizations and committees and individuals to make sure they don't steal. And they're just as corruptible as the first bunch. Maybe not directly. Maybe they can't be bribed. In some countries, yes, you just stick a big fat juicy envelope in front of them full of cash and suddenly your license is approved, your proposal is accepted, your grant is granted, and all goes smoothly. In this country we do things a bit more subtle, right? In this country we use influence and persuasion. Yes, but if you send us to jail, it's going to collapse the entire economy. So how about we use prosecutorial discretion and pump some more Fed money into it, and don't worry, it's all going to work out. In our country here, corruption of regulators is subtle. It's by indoctrinating them in the idea that what is good for the giant institutions is good for the economy, and that applying the rule of law or justice to protect consumers will hurt consumers in the long run. And if they buy into that idea, they're in your back pocket forever. Regulation doesn't work because it's a centralized solution to a centralized problem. And then there was Bitcoin. And Bitcoin offers us this really simple, elegant solution, the consensus algorithm. And the consensus algorithm works by aligning the incentives of the participants directly with the incentives of the broader network, by ensuring, not through regulation, not through rules, not through institutions, not through committees, not through fallible human beings, but instead through the elegance of mathematical theory applied to game theory, to incentives in a complex structure. The blockchain consensus algorithm ensures that cheating doesn't get you the reward. And that simple, elegant solution shouldn't work. It's the kind of thing that doesn't work in theory, but only in practice, like Wikipedia or the internet. If you look at it on a piece of paper, you think, that can't possibly work. What do you mean everybody can edit the articles? It's going to be a clusterfuck. Let's stick with Encyclopedia Britannica. We know how that works. And yet, in practice, it does work. In practice, at scale, the simple, elegant alignment of incentives with outcomes through game theory works. And it worked when Bitcoin was tiny in 2009, and it keeps getting better. It's actually more effective as time goes by. So now we're looking at a multi-billion-dollar economy where miners do not cheat. Have we discovered the most honest people on the planet? No. We haven't. Is the pie not big enough to steal? Of course it's big enough to steal. The shenanigans you see in a county committee to steal a few $1 million of waste management budget are legendary. And here we have a multi-billion-dollar economy and the miners are not stealing. And the reason they're not stealing is because the system makes it in their best interest to play by the rules rather than against the rules. Because we're not trying to build a system that asks you to not be evil. We've built a system where you can't be evil because it doesn't pay. And that is a better system. That is as better than centralized regulation, as antibiotics are better than bloodletting. And it's time to say, it's not that we don't think regulation is the right solution for Bitcoin. We don't think regulation is the right solution for anything because it doesn't fucking work. And you could see that every day, all around us. It doesn't work. If it worked, I'd be all for it. And maybe it does work on a very tiny scale for short periods of time, but in the long run and on the big scale, it doesn't work. And this isn't just a matter of philosophical or political differences, because when regulation fails to work, millions of people have their lives destroyed. This isn't just a matter of, hey, it didn't work. It didn't work. Yeah, it didn't work, and half of America's middle class ended up in poverty. A third of the homeowners lost their homes. Your college education is worth shit, and no one can find a job. That's not just a little oops. That's $20 trillion that disappeared. That's 250 million people who are in dire straits and have been for years and are seeing no possibility of things getting better. That's not a little oops. I'm not opposed to regulation for Bitcoin. I'm opposed to solutions that don't work. And so, let's look at this consensus algorithm, because I think we need to realize that the future of cryptocurrencies is the future of consensus algorithms. It's the future of scalable consensus systems that align incentives with the outcomes we desire. And we can take this and run with it. We can actually create better solutions for a much broader set of problems than simply don't steal the money. We've already shown it works for don't steal the money. And now we can show that it works for a broad variety of other systems. I'm most excited by the startups that we see in the space that are taking the consensus algorithm system of Bitcoin and they're applying it to novel problems. Not the Federal Reserve minting of currency problem, but problems about allocation of resources in a social environment, and even social interactions themselves. Proof of work is just the first step. One of the more interesting developments we're seeing now is other forms of consensus algorithms, like, for example, proof of resource. There's a few companies working in this space. And with proof of resource, what you do is you take resources that are currently underutilized or completely unused, like, for example, the disk space that's free on your laptop, the bandwidth on your wireless access point that's not being used, the CPU capability of your desktop computer, or even your mobile phone. And you're saying, how can we take that resource and share it? Now, I can share that today. We have the protocols. We have the software to take resources that are underutilized on personal computers and share them with others to create scalable peer-to-peer cloud computing systems. How many of you here share your excess computing, storage, and bandwidth? There's a lack of alignment of incentives with outcomes. You don't share them because an abundance of altruism is not a good enough reason for human behavior. That's a simple fact. It doesn't work. It works in very narrow scenarios. It works in very small local communities. It works at local scale. You can create mesh networks. You can create communes and co-ops and collaboration environments. But it doesn't scale. Consensus algorithms actually gives us an opportunity to take incentives that only work on the local level and scale them up so they work on a global level. So if you were able to share your Wi-Fi, and as you're sharing it, the very act of sharing mines coins in a proof of resource consensus algorithm and gives you a token that has value. A token that you can then use when you're traveling, so that when Marriott Renaissance, to pick a random example, asks you for $14.99 for 100 kilobits of Wi-Fi, you can say, fuck off, I'll use the shared network instead, and use some of your precious tokens that you've mined by being altruistic with incentives to now use the resource that is common. So you mine coins by sharing your network at home, you go traveling, you use those coins to use somebody else's networks. And suddenly, an incentive structure that would only work if everybody was being absolutely altruistic, meaning it wouldn't work on a large scale, can work on a very large scale. And suddenly, in 2014, mesh networks that have been a glimmer of possibility just on the edge of horizon for the last 2 decades suddenly seem like they could be real, and they could be happening on a massive scale pretty soon. That is incredibly exciting. The idea that you could take cloud computing resources from thousands and thousands of underutilized PCs and set up cloud computing networks by proof of resource mining. And the reason this works, or I think it will work, is because consensus algorithms take an incentive structure, and through the use of mathematics and game theory, they align it with the outcomes that you want to achieve as a community. So if what you want to do is increase the capacity of a shared resource like Wi-Fi bandwidth, and you align the incentives of a currency with that, it happens. And if it's on a transparent blockchain like Bitcoin's, you don't need to regulate it. I don't need to worry about whether the FCC is going to destroy net neutrality yet again on a proof of resource sharing network, because there is no FCC. I would like to believe that regulation works, because then the fact that 75% of the internet is against destroying net neutrality would be perfectly enough for the FCC to do its damn job. But they're not going to, because they have many, many paid lobbyists whispering into their ear that this is all about greedy Netflix trying to get more money. Well, guess what? I already paid for that Comcast connection. And if I choose to download Netflix, that's my money. Netflix doesn't need to pay again. I paid. You advertised 50 meg down. Where's my 50 meg? It's already paid for. The FCC is destroying net neutrality because it is suffering from regulatory failure. And if I had a proof of resource sharing mesh network, I wouldn't need to worry about that, because net neutrality would be ensured by the combination of a consensus algorithm and a transparent blockchain. I wouldn't need regulation because the system is self-regulating. I wouldn't need to ensure that one player can't dominate the environment, because one player can't amass the resource to dominate the environment. And if they did, the incentive would be for them to share that resource for reward rather than to use it to destroy the environment. But it goes a lot further than just allocating resources. One of the interesting experiments that we're beginning to see now, which I find fascinating, is the concept of proof of publishing and the use of consensus algorithms to incentivize behaviors on social media. Positive behaviors that build community, positive behaviors that enhance the conversation, the discussion. One of the organizations I work with, disclaimer here, Let's Talk Bitcoin, is launching an ambitious project. I have no idea if this is going to succeed, and I certainly wouldn't suggest that you buy into it, but I think it's worth looking at just to understand what Let's Talk Bitcoin is doing with this experiment, because whether Let's Talk Bitcoin succeeds or not in this experiment, I think the experiment tells us a lot about where consensus algorithms are going, and somebody else will eventually succeed here. So what Let's Talk Bitcoin is doing is creating a currency for content producers and content distributors that allows people to be rewarded by mining through publishing content. So proof of publication. So if you write a good article, and that article is read by many people, you earn currency. You earn currency by creating conversations that are valuable to other people. And it goes one step further. If you comment and enhance that discussion by commenting, you earn credits. If you provide reviews and editorial input by highlighting, upvoting if you like, the good stuff, and downvoting the bad stuff, and your editorial criteria are matched by others, so you upvote things that other people consistently find good and also upvote, then you're contributing to the conversation and you earn more points, which you can then spend to consume content, to read stuff. So this is going way beyond just micropayments and the ability to use currency to monetize content creation. We're talking about tying the very incentives of social participation and of quality of content directly to the consensus algorithm. So using the consensus algorithm to incentivize exactly the behaviors that make for a good community. It's not just about throwing a coin behind Reddit. It's about changing the fundamental mechanism by which we organize social behavior on social media. So, yes, it would be very cool if tomorrow morning Facebook announced that they're adopting Bitcoin as a payment mechanism. But if you look at this broader vision, it would actually be boring. What would be really cool is if social media sites started rewarding you for blocking trolls. I would be able to supplement my income quite nicely because I have a lot of trolls. And currently I'm blocking 5 or 6 of these trolls a week for free. But imagine if I could do that as my job and get rewarded because I'm removing negative influences from the conversation and promoting positive influences. And I'm getting rewarded simply by the consensus of the rest of the community that what I'm doing is useful. Now that is a powerful form of regulation. That is a system of regulation that can work, that will align the very incentives of individual behavior with the desired social outcomes for better conversation. The vision I see for cryptocurrencies is so much bigger than currency, because I see this as a way of creating self-regulating, dynamic feedback loops that allow us to achieve predictable outcomes in a fully transparent environment where you can see exactly how the behavior leads to the outcome and to the incentive structure, and where people don't behave well because we told them to, or because we threaten them with punishment, but because the incentives to do so are overwhelming, and the disincentives to behave badly in the environment are also overwhelming. And that's why I'm opposed to regulation, because it doesn't work. And that's why I believe strongly in the Bitcoin consensus algorithm, because it works. Thank you. We have maybe 10 minutes for